program we have going here at High-Tech High Media Arts. So we have our two student consultants, Bella and Marisol, right here. And then we also have Anna. And Anna's going to start us off sort of talking about the origins of this project and how we got this started.
Okay, so I was a student consultant, which is what we're calling this program, student consulting, when I was in college at Bryn Mawr. So Ben and Rob went to Haverford, which shared a consortium and an ed program with Bryn Mawr, where I went. And one of the professors there started a program called Student Consulting, where she puts students and she pairs them with professors, and they go in, they observe weekly, they give. Says Anna, we can't see you. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. We just can't see you.
Oh, how about now?
Yep, now we can.
Sorry. So weekly, I was part of this program. Weekly, I would go in and I would observe a professor's class, and then we would have lunch once a week to talk about evidence of, connection and engagement that I saw, and also places where I thought that they could really build up a connection with a specific student or enhance understanding for a whole group of students. And so when I was an intern back in 2010, Ben had me give a presentation to the director's meeting about this work that I was doing. And then 3 years later, after I'd been teaching here, Janie sent me an email and said, what do you think about trying that here at High-Tech? And so Ben and I got it off the ground in late August, early September. So basically what we first had to do is get some teachers on board. We said, how do you feel about some 11th graders coming into your classroom, watching what you do for 30 minutes a week, and then talking to you about what you could work on? And people were really excited about it. People jumped on board, and then we got a bunch of students in the mix. We started a training program over several months where they did practice rounds, they went on observations of teachers with Robert and with Ben. They would go in, they would observe teachers in their practice and then step out and debrief what they saw, what was evidence of engagement, what was evidence of connection with students, what was evidence of checking for understanding. And then we did some practice rounds. So we had some students come in or Ben came in to video me, and they watched the video and they practiced having a debrief conversation with me, and we finally scaffolded up to where they were ready. And we now have partnerships, so it's 2 student consultants for every 1 teacher that's involved, and every week the student consultants observe 30 minutes of class, and every other week they have a debrief meeting wherein they go over the evidence of excellent teaching they saw and the ideas for improvement or change within the classroom. And we've been doing it for about a semester. The basic protocol is 1 teacher observation a week, 1 debrief every 2 weeks, and we meet with the student consultants every Tuesday and every Thursday in our X block, where we continue to support their learning and their growth as student consultants, but also we have just recently started doing project tunings and dilemma consultancies for our participating teachers with our group of student consultants during that X block time. The last thing I want to say is why this work matters. We value student voice so much as an organization, and sometimes teachers don't really have a safe way to authentically hear student voice, and students don't have a way to safely share their voice with teachers that don't control their grades, even though a lot of teachers would never, or most teachers here would never take that out on a student for being honest. I think students don't always feel safe. So this provides an amazing opportunity for students to be trained and then feel safe sharing the student voice, and it helps teachers feel safe to hear that student voice and shift the practices around here and make this place stronger.
Great. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about some of the initial results of the program. So Daisy, if you can skip the slide. And here's just a real quick driver diagram that I'm not going to get into, but it exists if you want to look at it. Let's go to the next slide. Here are some more details kind of the implementation that Anna spoke to. Next slide. I think Anna spoke to this, about it's really about dialogue with this, about the student experience between the student and consultant and the cooperating teacher. Next slide. And so when we started this program, the aim of the initiative was to really ensure that it was mutually beneficial. Can you hit the next slide button? And so what that really meant was that for the cooperating teachers, that they felt like they were in dialogue with student consultants. Next slide. And for the student consultants, that they really felt like they were listened to, and as a result, they had a deeper, greater sense of belonging. Next slide. And so in terms of the preliminary results, we think that it's really promising, and we think that, you know, for the most part, this aim has been achieved. So when we did a survey with the student consultants, you can see that they, you know, really felt like they were always listened to in the vast majority of cases by the cooperating teachers that they worked with. And if you go to the next slide, I think this is even more powerful in terms of the idea that they felt like teachers actually changed their practice based on those conversations that they had. And at this point, I want to turn it over to two of our great student consultant teams, and they're going to talk about, each of them for about 45 seconds to a minute, about really the impact and the experience that the program has had on them. So I'm going to turn it over first to Marisol.
So when Anna had first brought this idea to me during advisory, and just hearing like the little details about it, I was like really excited to know that teachers cared about student voice the way that Anna does. And so the experience that I've had throughout the first semester of working with my old student consultant teacher was really inspiring and educational and knowledgeable, because you kind of get to really learn how the connection between the students and teachers work, and what effort it takes to become a teacher, and what toll it takes on you, both emotionally and like with all your workload and having to plan out lessons for everyone. So it's like I kind of have this new respect for teachers throughout this whole program, and it also kind of lets you bond with teachers that you normally wouldn't talk to on a certain level, and they see you on a different level than they do with your students, and also helps bring the students in their class and other students to come, having that student voice and being able to be safe, have a safe environment, and being able to talk to their teacher. So, yeah.
Yeah, and then just going off of what Marisol said, what I found that I got from the program so far is just being able to see the perspective through a teacher. And it's sort of difficult to juggle, like when you're observing, you want to see the perspective through like the students, and you want to see what they're learning and how they're learning it. And then but like at the same time, you're understanding the amount of effort that teachers have to put into their lesson plans and keeping up their engagement. And it's really inspiring to see like them actually listening and actually caring about what you have to say. Like they all said, it just provides a really safe environment for them to get honest feedback without without it being like a negative experience. It's always very positive.
Cool. So I'm going to try to wrap up. So if you can go to the next slide, I just want to share some more of the survey results. And this is from the perspective of the teachers who cooperated in the program. And you can see that for the vast majority of participants, this was either perceived as very beneficial or beneficial to their practice. And in the next slide, you'll note that just like the student consultants reported, that every single one of the teachers who participated reported that they changed something, in many cases, many things, about what they were doing with their practice. What I want to do now is close with some of the important themes and kind of frame a question that I'm really interested to hear people think about and talk a little bit about. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see that one of the themes, and this is something that both Marisol and I think Bella talked about really eloquently, is the idea that by being a student consultant, that the student consultants really were able to develop empathy for what it's like to be a teacher and really understand the challenges of being a teacher on a day-to-day basis. And it's really fascinating because if you go to the next slide, you'll see that kind of the sort of inverse of that is for the cooperating teachers. I think this program allowed them to sort of really think about what it meant to be a student and to really focus their attention to that student role and student perspective. And that shouldn't be that surprising because one of the things that Alison Cook-Sather, who's done a lot of this work, talks about is how the sort of impact of the program is actually very similar for both the student and the adult participants, and then it helps kind of change their perception of what it means to be a student or what it means to be a teacher from the opposite role. So I think that's one really interesting finding. If you go to the next slide, another slide was that teachers really did feel there was a lot of value in the feedback that they were getting from the student consultants around what the student experience was. And that was consistent across the comments, was that, I changed this because my students talked about how, they wanted to, in this case, have more visual ways of checking in what was happening in the classroom, and so just that value of getting the student experience. But if you go to the final slide, you'll see that, interestingly enough, it was also the case that some of the cooperating teachers felt like they wanted more objective, kind of focused feedback, and there was even some suggestion of maybe using something like High-Tech High, Teacher 2.0, to really ground the student feedback in a really clear, objective framework. And I think we're kind of facing a dilemma, and that's why we're really happy to have this opportunity to speak to this group about, I think all of us see that there's a lot of value in bringing the student perspective and student experience to bear in the feedback that they give teachers. But I also think that some of the teachers are clamoring for some more specific feedback oriented around a framework. So kind of how do we find the balance between those two objectives, I think, is really the question. And actually there is a final slide that shows that question. So I think that's really what we would bring to this group is, what do you think is the best way to kind of support the student consultants in providing that meaningful feedback to cooperating teachers. So thanks, everyone.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, HTHMA team. That was a fantastic presentation of the work that you've been doing so far, and gave us some great kind of orientation to your dilemma. So that's fabulous. So it would be fabulous, actually, if we could have this question. Those of you who are participating in the room, feel free to kind of jot it down. We'll come back to that, but we're going to move into clarifying questions and probing questions. So this is the time, and we'll kind of shift the times a little bit because we started a little late, so maybe we'll take 3 minutes or so for clarifying questions. But these are just those quick questions that we have for the HTHMA team to help us kind of better understand the context of their work and of their dilemma. So they're things that they don't even have to pause to answer. It's literally questions like, how many students did you try this change idea with? So if anybody has clarifying questions, it would be great if we could just enter those into the chat box, and then I will call up your name and ask you to ask your question out loud. And since we're such a small group, feel free also just to unmute yourself and ask your question if that feels better than the chat box. So Ben, go ahead, why don't you ask your question and get us going, and then we've got one from Rob as well after that.
My question is, what specifically did the teachers change in their classroom?
Yeah, so actually, do you want to speak to that? Something specific that you remember your teacher changing?
There was, when we had first when my partner and I had first went in for one of our observations, we noticed that it's a humanities class, and he does a 15-minute write-up, warm-up every day, and the students weren't writing and they weren't engaged in the prompt that there was. And thinking back to what my teacher does, he gives us a prompt to write about, and he always mentions, just write as much as you can. It's not about perfection. Just get words on a page so you can practice your writing skills. And in the end, if you have nothing to write on that topic, you can write a story or write something else. Just practice your writing skills. So my partner and I had went into our debrief, and we had suggested for him to tell his students to tell them that it's okay not to write specifically about that topic, just get your writing skills working and your brain working. And he actually did change that. He posed it to his students so that he now has them just finding a different way to attack or handle warm-ups.
Great, thank you so much. Rob, do you want to jump in with your questions?
I had a couple questions. One was how many students are in the program, and then the other one was how are the students matched with the cooperating teachers?
Yeah. So this past for the first semester, we had 9 student consultants and 5 cooperating teachers. And for this semester now, we've expanded a little bit. So now we have 11 student consultants. We're hoping to grow to be 12, and we have 6 cooperating teachers. Anna, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of how we match them up?
So I'm lucky enough to know this group of students pretty well. They were my first students, a lot of them, and Marisol's my advisee. So I know their personalities well, and I think one thing that Ben and I really were intentional about was not just thinking of the first students that came to mind for leadership positions. Really I pushed myself to think of the students who often seemed to not be engaged when I was teaching or in projects that I did as a first-year teacher. And the students who, of those who were not that engaged, those students who were really thoughtful about what they wanted from their education, and I knew that through multiple conversations with these students. So we have, I'd say, half and half students who self-identify as incredibly high achieving in the classroom, college-bound, and very, very engaged in learning, and then half who self-identify as I love learning, but I don't like the way that the system works, and I have questions about why we learn, what we learn, when we learn. And so I think that mix was really important. I think it was really important to have gender diversity, socioeconomic diversity, racial diversity within the group. And then we tried to make pairings with as much diversity in experience and opinion as possible. Marisol, do you want to speak to your partnership and kind of how it works and why it works well?
My partner, I would say, like, we are completely different people. I think we have, in the classroom, we learn very differently, and the way we tackle our work and our life is very different, and also our social life, I guess I would say, is very different. But with together, we bring very different views on what we like to see in a teacher and how we like to learn. So it actually, I think it works out really well, because at least for having, and it showed really with our first teacher that we were paired up with, because our first teacher was able to really relate well with my partner, and he was able to relate very well with our teacher, and it's two different kind of relationships about how, like, I related with the teacher and how he related with me, and so it's very different things. And so having that partnership, and I think it shows in all the different partnerships, is if we both can bring something to the table that neither of the person has, and so kind of we can build on it.
Something
I think we lost our presenters for a moment. They're back.
Sorry, we just got kicked off, but maybe we should just jump right into the probing questions.
Yeah, let's jump into probing questions. We've got a few. I think you guys did such a fantastic job giving us an overview of your program and how it's rolled out that people just want to jump right into probing, so let's do it. How about Ben? Would you like to kick us off?
I'd like to hear from, from the students. When you hear this question of giving teachers more objective feedback, I'd love to hear, like, what's your reaction to this idea of giving teachers more objective feedback?
Well, when I hear that, and we have talked about it at length, is just kind of not beating around the bush and kind of trying to make their feelings not hurting their feelings and caring about their feelings. Yes, you're not going to come off and say, like, oh, you suck as a teacher, but, like, more objective feedback is kind of getting straight to the point and providing examples, scenarios of how that feedback would work, I think, is what. And I don't mean, it's not really like, it doesn't affect me when I hear, like, objective feedback, because we're new to this program. It's new to us, and we're students, so, like, we're learning along the way. It's not like a diss on my consulting or on my feedback. It's just another way of hearing, like, okay, this is not an issue, but an issue, then we need to grow on it. So it's like, it doesn't really affect me, like, on a personal level. Yeah.
Great. And Rob, you had a question?
Well,
Uh-oh.
Oh. I think Ben had another one also,
Yeah,
it sounds like.
Actually, Jenny, it's your question, so why don't you ask your question?
Oh, sure. I like the way Rob asked it better. So here we go. What bumps in the road? Describe a difficult moment?
For students, right?
Yeah, for students. What was a difficult moment?
I think from personal experience with my my student consulting teacher, I know that me and my partner did come to. We have built a really strong connection and relationship with him, and one of our observations, we had went in and we had noticed that none of the students were cooperating in a Socratic seminar, and I had heard prior to going in that how the first half of his day went with his first class, and that kind of was just like, wow, like none of them talked. All like someone said that this was stupid, and like as a student, like and how I participate in Socratic seminars and kind of also being on the teacher's side, I guess my judgment had gotten clouded in that thought process and the way attacking that situation. And Anna had pointed it out to me and my partner. It's all kind of bringing it back to why the students weren't talking and what could the teacher have done to encourage them to talk, and like how was the environment in the classroom. And I think that bump in the road was kind of brought me back to the whole reason why we do this program, is just to bring back student voice and have the students be heard in the classroom and have a safe environment in the classroom.
If you had to frame that dilemma, how would you frame it?
Becoming too one-sided in the student consulting relationship, and kind of forgetting about the students.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. So I have what I think is a probing question, and then Steve, if you have a probing question that you want to ask before we move into the discussion, you can chat it in or say it. I'm curious, and this could be for anybody, what's your sense of because it sounds like teachers are getting a lot out of the program, and they're also asking for more objective feedback, and I'm curious, what do you think teachers are craving? Like, what's behind that request? What's your hunch?
Well, I think so. In the early weeks, Ben and I did so much work prepping students to be really tactful. And so I remember the very first teaching video we watched, the kids were ready. They were just chomping at the bit to be like, terrible. Those kids weren't paying attention. That was so boring. She didn't even write it on the board. They don't know what they're talking about. I mean, just a laundry list of things that this teacher had failed in. And so we had to refocus the conversation to really invite more positivity, but also not just for the sake of positivity, but also to help train the students to really see evidence of excellent teaching, because there's evidence of good teaching everywhere. And so they got so good at that that I think a lot of the participating teachers felt as though the authentic feedback, critical feedback, and ideas for change were maybe diluted with some of the like pats on the back. So I think that it's really coming from a place of, okay, thanks for my sticker, thanks for my prize on what I did well. What should I change? Because I didn't make this clear in the beginning, but all of the teachers participating are either first-year teachers, period, or they're first-year teachers in the high-tech system. And so the need for what can I do differently tomorrow is big.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add really quickly that I think another dynamic is that the time of year when we asked this question is right as they were having their first formal check-in with the director, and the director at our school uses the High Tech High Teacher 2.0 as kind of a basis for having that conversation. And so I think there was this kind of thought that like maybe those two things could be integrated together so that the student consultant would be kind of helping them move towards sort of developing those characteristics, and then it could be sort of like a more cohesive structure where the student consultants sort of fit into this bigger evaluation system. Personally, I'm sort of conflicted about whether I think that that's the best model, but I think that that's some of the sort of reasoning, the reason behind them sort of saying that.
And when we did bring that model to the students, they all read it, they discussed it, and they they came up with, we like this, we want to use this as a reminder, we do not want to use this as a checklist. They don't want to be bound to that list, but they were inspired by that list. And am I characterizing that right, Marisol? And the idea of having that list seemed helpful.
Great. And Steve, are you able to ask your question really quick, or do you want me to? Okay,
I was
great.
curious about whether, and if so, how being a consultant had an impact on the students' experience of being a student, of being in the classroom, and whether that might have changed your behavior as students.
I think, like I said before, it has definitely brought to my attention the effort that gets put into being a teacher, and I have so much respect for teachers and all the work that they do put in. As a student being in the classroom, I think
Froze again.
That's okay. It was just a student talking. It's not that important to us anyway.
Thanks, Ben.
Very funny. The irony, the student freezes. It's horrible. Okay, well, let's see. If they are not able to join us in the next 10 seconds, I'm going to suggest that we just go back to that we start the discussion, and we'll do our best to kind of take notes and capture parts, hopefully, that they can join. Daisy, can you scroll to the slide about, that's their focus question, just so that we can keep that in mind? Great. Thanks. So it seems like at the heart of this question, they've kind of talked a little bit about what meaningful feedback has meant so far. Hi, Ben, you're back.
Oh, sorry about that.
So we were just going to move into the discussion phase.
Great.
We recognize the great irony of that it cut off a student mid-comment. So if you want to take 30 seconds to just wrap up whatever you were sharing, that's great, but we're also happy to move on to the discussion. It's your call.
No, I finished. It just...
Okay. Well, I'm sorry we missed that finish. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move into the discussion portion, and we're going to actually do this in a kind of condensed version. We're going to have about 12 minutes, and we're going to do our best to really hone in on this dilemma that Ben and his team has brought to us, and it sounds a little bit like meaningful feedback to the teachers has come to mean something around like objective, getting some authentic, critical feedback, and in addition to the pats on the back, and so we'll kind of tackle it from there. So it would be great if we could start our discussion with just a round of celebrations. What strikes us about this work, what we've heard today that we're excited about, and from there we'll move on to ideas and pushes around the dilemma.
Pretty hard not to be enthusiastic about this. It seems really spectacular to me to provide the opportunity to have the teachers who are receptive and the students who are confident enough to engage in this process.
Fantastic. So Rob, I would love to hear from you next, and then Ben and Janie, you're going to be up.
Well, I think it's a very exciting project, partly because what it does when students are operating as consultants in this way, what it does is kind of change it does level the playing field and changes the authority relationship between teachers and students, which is what I think that High Tech High aspires to at its best. I mean, I see this kind of dialogue and this kind of conversation as a model for what might go on in all High Tech High classes. Not that we might reach a point where it wouldn't be necessary to bring in outside consultants, outside student consultants, although it's good to always have an outside perspective, but where that kind of conversation might be going on as a matter of course in every classroom between students and teachers.
Great. Ben and Janie?
Okay. I mean, like Steve said, this is self-evidently fantastic, and it's really cool to see. I mean, actually, I guess for me personally, to see the tree from Allison Cooksather to Anna to this work taking off now is personally, you know, I was on the hiring committee. I was included as a student voice in hiring Allison Cook-Sather at Haverford College in 1994. And so the ghost of Allison, who is still with us, you know, is kind of being realized here. I just think it's great. I've taken a few cuts at getting this kind of work happening before, and I think you've taken it much farther than I ever had. So that's delightful, basically.
Yeah, and I guess I have been lucky enough to have been peripherally involved, like popping into XBlock and getting to see this work evolve over the course of the year, and I definitely want to recognize the students and the teachers, and also Anna and Ben for all of the work that they've put into structuring this really thoughtfully. And for me, on the new to high-tech high teacher side, it's like such an amazing and authentic way for us to really embody the fact that we value student voice like we do, and we can say that to new teachers, and if we're doing this, it's really clear that we do, and it really disrupts sort of traditional notions of authority in schools, and I think that's particularly powerful for teachers who are new to our schools.
Great. I just want to echo that, like, one of my favorite quotes is by Michael Folan, who talks about students being vastly underutilized resources in school change efforts. And I was really struck by the story that one of the students shared about the writing suggestions that they had made to a teacher. I was just thinking about how challenging it is for teachers to get into each other's classrooms, even in schools like ours, and the fact that students can kind of serve as pedagogical ambassadors, kind of suggesting things for one teacher that they've experienced in another, I think is really amazing and powerful. So let's turn our attention now then, assuming we could go on celebrating for hours, to the dilemma here, and what are our ideas for how student consultants could provide meaningful feedback to cooperating teachers, knowing they're already doing that, but that there maybe is a desire for more critical and blunt or potentially objective feedback. What could that look like? And we could start with just thinking about that high-tech high teacher document that we're familiar with and the pros and cons of using that, or we could lead off with any other ideas that appear for us.
Maybe I missed it because I know I was in and out with my computer. I mean, everything crashing, but I think that maybe this is already done, but if teachers pose questions to the student consultants about what they particularly would like them to look at, that would be a support towards giving meaningful feedback. But of course, that's not the end. I mean, as a student consultant, one looks for things that the teacher wants you to look for, but then you need to be looking for other things too that the teacher may not have thought about. But kind of centering things around an initial request by the teacher would help. Maybe you're already doing that.
Go ahead.
I'm going to say one other thing.
Oh no.
I'll jump in. Go ahead, Steve.
We'll have to have Rob see his other thing be connected. And I hope I don't have another hot water heater leak. I had to absent myself because my water heater sprung a leak, and anyway, I'm back. I was thinking along. I guess I wished I had asked a question about whether there was an opportunity after a discussion between the consultants and the teachers for reflection on the process, during which time the teacher could say, I'm very glad to have gotten the pats on the back, but what I really appreciated was the suggestions for how I could improve. So that was one thing I thought of. If that isn't happening now, that's sort of part of the high-tech high protocol, and could be something that's added if it isn't happening already. The other thing I'm thinking about is students sharing with each other the experiences they've had and what they've learned from the process that has had the biggest impact, and telling each other about those experiences, and thereby I would predict giving and boosting each other's confidence about being able to go ahead and plunge into the things that they might experience as more difficult, more challenging.
Great. Rob, did you want to finish your thought before you got cut off, and then we'll go over to Ben? Yeah. Oh, he's frozen again. Ben, you're up.
Yeah, I was thinking about a number of resources that I think could be helpful to the team. One is that our school directors in the last month or two have been having conversations about how to give effective feedback to teachers, and I think it'd be kind of interesting to tie these two separate conversations together, so we could think about how to kind of structure that. I think that would be kind of interesting. And then as part of that, we read this book, I believe, by, her name is Elena Aguilar, which I thought was very helpful. So I can send, or any of us, I guess, can probably send that on to the team if you don't know her work. Or there was some concreteness around ways of thinking about feedback. That, for example, in particular, there was she makes this point about sort of like the 8 different kinds of roles that we need to play. One is being empathic and listening, and another one is giving directed feedback. And I actually felt like having that taxonomy of kinds of feedback gave me more permission to give more direct feedback, and sort of thinking that the only thing I should be doing is listening, and then, oh, tell me more about that, which is like, yes, that is it is what we should do, and it's part of it, but it's not the only thing. So I thought I found that provocative. And then the Crucial Conversations text, I think I've also found really helpful for thinking about how to have challenging conversations. And of course, maybe they're doing all these things, but I wondered if they've looked at that. I could imagine reading a passage of that with students, or actually even Stacy and I have done work with teachers and school leaders about how to. We have like written up different like case studies of like examples of having challenging conversations. They might even practice some of those during X Block. I think that could be just like little case studies that could be really fun. I would love to come help with that. Actually, that'd be really fun to get into, I think. And then I'll stop talking soon. But you know, the Carnegie Foundation has done this work in the building a teacher effectiveness network called B10, and they have some interesting reports they've done that were focusing on how to support new teachers, and they were in particular focused on the teacher-principal relationship and how to help principals give better and more clear, useful feedback to teachers. And I feel like if that's not part of their wheelhouse of things they've been looking into, I think that could be another resource that might be helpful.
Great. So Rob, it looks like we have you. Let's get you while we can.
Yeah. About?
If you remember what you were saying earlier, you got cut off mid-sentence.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it seems like every time I just want to say one more thing, then the program crashes on me and I can't say it. So, I
don't think Rob's there.
I think, yeah, it's a good program. So, a very sentient program. So, I
think we're going to have to chip in and get Rob a new wireless router.
Yeah, but I'm not on wireless. But anyway,
I also think that, again, like Rob said, maybe this is already obvious to them, but I did want to like kind of echo what he said about I have found that when, like this consultancy protocol, when you're very clear in one sentence, this is the specific thing I want feedback on, it invites people to feel like less like, oh, I'm not sure if I can give this feedback. Yeah. So maybe they're already doing it, but maybe there's something we worked on around like, let's get really clear into one sentence specifically what we're hoping to get feedback from the students on, because then and frame it as we really want to. We've heard that people want more direct feedback from students. One thing we've learned is that if we're more specific about the invitation, that helps people do it. So maybe there's something refining that process, or maybe that's already happening. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. I mean, the question is, what do I have permission to say and to address? And I would say that as a teacher,
just building a little bit on. Can you guys hear me?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes. So I think we're having a tech issue where some people can hear Rob and other people can't. So how about let's hold off. I'm going to have Rob finish your thought because I know that Ben and Anna can hear what he's saying. Okay. And then when he's done, I'll have Janie join in. All right, Rob, carry on.
So as a teacher, over the years, whenever a student said to me, I want you to be really critical about this, I want you to really sock it to me and tell me what I did wrong here. If I go and do that, it doesn't work so well because the student is offended and hurt. I mean, there's kind of a balance that's needed all the time. That's a sideline. But I also tuned into the specific example of giving feedback to the teacher about a writing assignment, about the initial writing assignment, because what was happening, it seems to me, in that instance, was an issue of freedom and control. How much freedom do students have to write what they want to write? How much control is the teacher exercising over what is written? And what is the proper balance? And I think that the solution was a great one. If you can't respond to this prompt, then write about something that you want to write about. I mean, that was a fabulous solution. But I think in many of the instances of what's going on between teachers and students, that issue of freedom and control is a really important issue. It always seems to be there, and so which leads me to wonder if there might be some pockets of themes that the coaches and Anna and Ben might kind of put together as well. These are the themes that really seem to come up in the classroom dynamic, and let's name them. Freedom and control is one. And what are some of the others? Some of them have to do with clarity. Some of them having to do with maintaining attention, engagement, and so on.
Great. So I'm going to do my best to summarize really quickly what Rob said, since I know some people weren't able to hear it. Rob was saying some wonderful things about just what jumped out to him about that episode about the writing was this tension between freedom and control, and that there are probably themes that emerge in kind of what makes for good teaching and how students experience it that could become frames or lenses that student consultants could use to provide feedback in teachers. Some other examples were clarity or engagement, but there could be in similar of a continuum of instructional practices we're after that would feel perhaps less like a checklist. So that is my best attempt at summing up what Rob shared more eloquently in the last couple moments. Janie, you get the last word, and then we're going to invite the team back to reflect on what they heard.
Okay, well, I like yours and Rob's last word better. Mine, I just was thinking logistically about having the consultants and the teachers, they're all in new partnerships now, having a pre-meet sort of as they begin this semester's work where they connect about what goals the teachers have for the semester and what they'd like feedback on. And I really like the idea of bringing those frames to the work. It provides some structure, but not like a checklist that's too prescribing, I think.
Great, thank you. All right, and I chatted in the title of the book that Ben was mentioning from the equity coaching. So this is the moment now, HTHMA team, where you get to come back, and we'll give you just 2 or 3 minutes just so that you can reflect on anything that you heard, takeaways, possible next steps, would be great.
First, thanks for the feedback. This is something that we think about all the time, and it's really helpful to have new perspectives and perspectives that have seen this work through, me and Ben. I think the things that I'm taking away are definitely visiting crucial conversations in the art of coaching and pulling out some passages that we can read and really unpack with the kids and practicing some strategies we get from that. I think that would be really helpful. I also really like this notion of pulling out themes that you see in an effective classroom, and it actually reminds me of a conversation I had with the consulting group yesterday about what is evidence, what makes a great teacher, and they were able to really pull out things that they could point to of qualities of an excellent teacher, and I think that we could easily translate that into a taxonomy, as Ben said. So just like a list of themes. I mean, I'm even wondering about doing it like Allison Cook-Sather does it at the college level, which is that the teachers all kind of address one topic per week or 2 weeks, and the students do as well. So assessment, engagement, classroom culture. If we do it like that and hold many seminars, but I do like generating a list of themes with the student consultants and then having them use that as sort of a lens through which to give feedback to their teachers.
Yeah. Like one thing, so I would echo the sort of general comments that Anna shared, that there are some really tangible, specific things that we could work to integrate in the next couple of weeks and months. One idea that I thought is interesting and something that the teachers have talked about is sort of how do the teachers, when they're debriefing with the student consultants, create this space where the student consultants feel like, okay, now is the time to kind of share that critique. And if we can sort of develop a common language about, like, you know, maybe when the teacher is feeling like, yeah, I'm really like ready for this, that they can sort of signal that. Because I do think sometimes the student consultants go in with something, but then they're a little bit hesitant based on how that conversation goes. So I think that there's probably something there and something to think about. You know, I think this kind of all gets back, though, to this sort of like bigger conversation that's really interesting. You know, like when we talked to Allison and we talked to her about how we spent along many weeks sort of thinking about what it meant to be a student consultant and be an instructional coach. And we talked to Allison about it, and Allison's response was, I never have any training or any sort of like a support for the student consultants because I want them to bring a pure student lens to this work. And so I think it's a really interesting balance with this project to sort of respect that and really bring that pure, like, hey, we want to really bring student experience to bear, but also create the supports for these dynamic conversations around the student experience to happen in a way that's positive for both the consultants and the teachers. So I think finding that balance is really hard, but I think some of these ideas are good ways to kind of move us in that direction without being too prescriptive. And I think the idea of like sort of larger themes is a good way to think about it. And I think those themes could also go both ways. I think you could also have the teachers be knowledgeable about those themes, and then that could be a way where they could say to the student consultant, hey, I'm really interested in you thinking about sort of this freedom and control theme this week in my classroom. So I think that those themes could work for both sides, which is exciting.
Great, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing your work with us. We are 2 minutes away from, oh yeah, do we have the students? Are the students still there to share any?
Unfortunately, they had some after-school obligations, so they had to leave a few minutes ago.
I thought I saw them leave. Okay. All right, great. So we have 2 minutes to debrief this process. And yes, thanks to Ben, Anna, and students. Daisy has been taking copious notes from the conversation and also pasting some ideas that have emerged through the chat box. As you guys were sharing your next steps, it sounds like several other suggestions and next steps emerged as well from folks in the room. So I guess it'd be great to have just a 1 minute reflection on this process. Did we answer your question, guys? That's the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an unanswerable question, but we took steps towards growing our practice. I mean, I think we both walked away with multiple tangible things that we want to try tomorrow.
Great. And any quick suggestions from anybody about how to make this process a little more effective? I think clearly we're working on some tech issues and just getting more people into the room things, but anything that struck you from participating in this particular protocol?
Very well prepared. The only thing when I saw your question, it was hard for me to figure out what more the students needed because they seem to be doing such a great job. So that and that might have been my own sort of lack of focus on what you were needing. But it did seem to me when I saw the question, I was thinking they need help. They're doing such a great job of giving feedback, and the teachers are responding so well to the feedback. What's the dilemma? That wasn't a serious problem, though, as you can tell. We just dug right in anyway.
You know what I think would be...
What might have helped with that, actually, is, not as a critique really, but to state the obvious, if one of the teachers who's participating had been here, it would have been cool to hear their perspective. And I'm sure you probably tried and it didn't work out or whatever, but anyways, like that would have probably helped us be more clear on the perspective from from like the participating teacher's perspective.
Yeah, agreed. The one thing I was going to say, just like as a basic kind of process with what I imagine to be an issue with all of these Hangouts, is just like maybe this feature doesn't exist, but just a timer that would just show like for how long you've sort of been talking. I think is like a good visual reminder of like, hey, like, you know, like it's a good visual reminder of like the norm of like share the air. I think that would be powerful.
Good suggestion. Great. Okay, well, it's 4:31, folks. I say we adjourn. Thank you very much for sharing your work with us, Anna, Ben, and students in absence right now, but it was fantastic to have the student perspective part of this conversation too. So everybody should feel free to continue the conversations, keep sending suggestions. I think we have lots of ways we'd love to pitch in and be working with you to kind of move the program forward. So thank you again for everything, and thanks Daisy for tech.
Yep.
On a very
Well done,
challenging
guys.
first tech endeavor, so well done.
No wonder.
Yeah, I feel like I needed to be in Rob's house. But.
Next time.
Right, I got the hang of it, I swear.
All right, bye all. Thank you.
Wow.